Hello, I'm Tom Harper.
And I'm Diana Thomas.
Welcome to That Wilbur Smith Show.
A podcast about the historical, geographical, natural, and human background to the world of Wilbur Smith.
They turned north from Pietermaritzburg and climbed steadily up across bleak grassland towards the mountains. On the third day, they saw the Drakensberg, jagged and black as the teeth of an ancient shark along the skyline. The pass ran like a twisted gut through the Drakensberg. The mountains stood up sheer and black on each side of them, so they rode in shadow and saw the sun only for a few hours in the middle of the day. Then the mountains dropped away, and they were out into the open.
Today we're going to continue our exploration of Wilbur Smith's first book, When the Lion Feeds. At the end of the last episode, we left our hero Sean Courtney heading north with his friend Mbajani on a new adventure, having given his half of the family ranch to his brother Garrick. In the next part of the story, Sean is going to make a lot of money. But how?
Well, interesting you should ask. So the book's divided into various sections. The first one, part one, is Natal, so that's his boyhood. And then part two is Witwatersrand. And again, this very economical storytelling. My copy, page 179, Sean sets out. They turn north from Pietermaritzburg. And so that's page 179. And by page 183, he's in a bar, and a man is showing him a piece of rock which he says comes from the Witwatersrand over the mountains, and maybe it contains gold. So no time is lost in the storytelling. But before he sees the gold, he meets this other, probably the most significant character in the book, in my view, after Sean, who goes by the wonderful name of Duff Charleywood, known as Duff.
That's a kind of Dickensian name, isn't it, Duff Charleywood?
Yes, and in fact, there is a scene very late in the book, actually, where Sean reads him Dickens. So again, I wonder if that was in Wilbur's mind too. And again, this sort of none more Wilbur introduction. I mean, we've talked about this other times, that how you meet a character, how you introduce a character as an author, is one of the most important things in your arsenal as a writer, to kind of set up that character. Of course, Sean and Duff meet in a barroom brawl, and Sean's gone in a foul mood. A man actually offers to buy him a drink while he's drunk and is just in a sulk. The guy's drunk, and so Sean starts a fight. And six of the regulars in this bar turn on him. And this is the moment where I thought, Wilbur just doesn't think like I think. And I need to really, if I'm going to be working on these books with him, I really need to up my game, my imaginative game. Because I tell you, if I'm in a bar in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Natal, and six burly coal mining types start facing off with me, I absolutely am going to run like hell to get out of there. Whereas Sean thinks, great. And there's this great line when they start the fight. Gone too was his mood of depression, and in its place was a sense of relief. This was what he needed. It's like this idea that this fight's going to be cathartic for him, and he's a bit depressed.
He definitely thinks like that, and I think there are guys who do. It's like for example, something ridiculous thing, but rugby players being kind of really cross when the game is made safer.
Yes, yeah.
What they want to do is hit one another. That's the pleasure of the game, is that for 80 minutes you can just go out there and bash people and be bashed. I mean, the bashing is sort of the point of it.
Yeah. And again, I think because people who write books and people who read books are generally sort of more sensitive, imaginative sort of people, I think it's often harder to identify with that kind of attitude. So again, the fact that Wilbur gets that in there and again doesn't shy away from it. There's no apology that Sean's a man who likes to use his fists and finds this sort of cleansing violence. It's just how he is. And again, I think that's part of this very stark, sometimes brutal portrayal of Sean as a character.
He's also, he's among a bunch of kind of roughneck gold prospectors who are, this is not a place for sensitive flowers, I think. I don't think you or I would necessarily have been dashing off to the Witwatersrand ourselves.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, you're right. And then his fun is to some extent diminished because somebody offers to help him out. Enter.
Yes, enter Duff Charleywood. Yeah.
Who's this? He's a kind of languid, upper class, second, third, or fourth son of a rather horrible British aristocrat who's basically been kicked out of the family home, gone off to Canada, I think, to find his fortune.
That's right.
Left Canada. And he's this sort of, well, he is a sort of a Bertie Wooster character. And so he talks in this very kind of, oh, I say, old boy, dear chap, kind of very posh English way. And I think it's quite a nice foil for Sean, who's much more the rough colonial. And together, and it turns out that Duff Charleywood knows a bit about rock and understands that the lump that Sean has been given actually contains gold.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Duff as a foil to Sean, because absolutely. Whereas I think in the first part, Gary is the foil. In this part, Duff is absolutely the foil, and there are similarities in their stories. So both have kind of run away from home to seek their fortunes because of kind of issues with their families. In fact, Duff again had a brother who basically wouldn't share the inheritance and was jilted in love. So kind of it's different to Sean, but there's kind of echoes of what's happened to him. So, but and it's interesting again the way that Wilbur writes this is even the way they fight tells you about their character. So Duff takes out his cane and like with two quick taps of his lead-weighted cane takes out his two guys in the bar brawl, and Sean then just opens his arms wide, like in a sort of bear hug, and charges into all four of the remaining guys and knocks them all down and just jumps on them.
He works out before he charges the kind of distance they are between you and another, and realizes they're far enough to get them all. I must say the kind of the 4-in-1 rugby tackle. Since we're going back to that, but it sort of is.
Yeah, it is exactly that. Yeah.
Speaking of someone who's written a fair amount of fight scenes, I thought that was one point at which I thought, I'm not sure you get all four. Think of the strength you have to have at the furthest reaches of your arms and hands to grasp 4 sets of meaty thighs and bring them all at once to the ground. Nevertheless, he is a hero, and heroes can do things.
And he is a Courtney, and Courtneys can definitely do things that lesser mortals can't.
And as a writer, I mean, and here's an interesting thing. I mean, writers very often create characters who are precisely what they aren't themselves, if you see what I mean, and fulfill some part of your character that you've not been able to fulfill.
Yeah.
And I don't think Wilbur himself actually was a punchy, fighty, brawly person. I mean, I think he has run-ins with his father, and we'll come to all those later. But I don't think he was a brawler. In fact, I'm pretty sure he wasn't. So, it's fun to write that. It's fun to do those things which can't be done normally.
It's like Lee Child says, you always write your protagonist 2 inches taller than you are yourself.
Which actually, given how tall Lee is, that's
well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, this is why Reacher is quite as big as he is.
Anyway, they go off. Duff and Sean go off, and they pool their resources to buy a set of plots. And there's a sort of the reason they do this is because they get both figuratively and literally, in Duff's case, into bed with this rather wonderful character, Candy, who's the kind of proprietress of the saloon, as it were, kind of like a character in a Western.
Yeah, she really isn't. She's like the saloon owner,
and she happens to have a series of she's got some stakes, and they persuade her basically to give them an option on the stakes in exchange for a much higher price if they strike gold. And she's the kind of beautiful bar lady with a heart of gold.
Yeah.
And she becomes their pal. I mean, she becomes, and it will become, or doesn't become, well, she becomes Duff's lover, and we'll come up with what happens next. But I mean, she's interesting character because she's written very much as a chum, if you know what I mean. She's obviously very sexy, but she's not particularly sexualized in the book. She's very much their collaborator and their kind of confidant and their partner, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I think that's right. And again, a kind of I think shows the breadth of Wilbur's writing, the way that, as you said, female characters often across all fiction often fall into kind of stereotypes, and actually, she's not quite that. She's not being seen with as much of the male gaze.
And she has
I
quite a,
think.
she has
Yeah.
an interesting and complex emotional relationship with the two guys. It's kind of a bit Julie et Jim, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yes.
Not on bicycles. But anyway, it turns out that the claims she had are indeed literally a gold mine.
Yes.
And after various toings and froings, and naturally almost going bust before they really strike the big gold rush, they end up making a huge fortune, as one understands it, and becoming and it's interesting, and Sean is clearly physically and morally corrupted by the money he makes, which is quite an interesting thing. It doesn't do him any good.
Yeah, and I think this is really the heart of the book. This bit from when they strike gold through when Sean finally leaves Johannesburg, and it's Roald Dahl has this great quote that what children want in books is money and chocolate. Oh, what children like is money and chocolate, and I think we don't really change as grown-ups either. And I think there's something just the sort of wish fulfillment wonderful about reading about them amassing this fortune, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I've written novels featuring kind of extremely wealthy characters, and again, I sort of suffer from a paucity of imagination as to like what would it be to be fantastically rich, and I sort of struggle to lift my mind to how you would spend that much money. But Wilbur has no problem with that. First of all, they're investing in the machinery. That's fine. Then they build this. They build a brothel and a stock exchange, and which are the two things that Johannesburg needs.
Yes, they do.
Um,
And they call their mine the Candy Deep, which is Candy Deep sounds like a porn star.
Candy, named after the lady who owned the claim, and deep because they're digging deep. But yes, you're right. It put together, it does. There's something just slightly obscene about it, isn't there?
But the thing about it is that this is the point at which Sean is dressing up Mbajane in rather offensive costumes, and it's clear that as I say, he's becoming soft, physically and mentally soft. They're becoming very self-indulgent. The money is very much a poisoned chalice. It's not. This is not a book in which, as it were, Jack plants his beanstalk and goes up and gets all the giant's gold, and that's great. No, he's corrupted by it, and then he loses it all. And now this is another point, because what essentially happens is that there's a man called Hradsky who has accumulated great wealth, and Duff and Sean go into business with him. And then Max, who is Hradsky's kind of right-hand man, and there's a certain sense that they may be gay lovers, because Max is written it's very effete. He's the pretty young thing. And Max comes to Sean and Duff with this scheme, because he says he's sick of Hradsky. He can't bear it. He's always having to kind of be his yes man. They have, it's kind of long story short, they're going to trick Hradsky. They're going to buy his shares short and sell them long. And it turns out that basically Max has been duping them. The whole thing is a trap set by Hradsky. The trap is sprung, and they're left with nothing, because he turns the trick onto them. And basically, instead of them taking all his shares, he takes all their shares. He does, as it turns out, do Sean a kind of favor, because then Sean is once again forced to go out into the wild. And Duff goes with him, and they become elephant hunters. Off they go, and they take with them Mbajane, and Mbajane has brought a number of other Zulus to work with them on the mine. And a lot of those Zulus then come with Mbajane into the wild with Sean and Duff. So they set off again, I think, northbound, still going north. I can't remember.
Yes, I think again, there's a joke about it, isn't there? That that's the direction they were going, so they keep going in that direction.
And what they come across is lots and lots of elephant.
Yeah.
And they shoot and they take the ivory from lots and lots of elephant.
Yes.
So when The Lion Feeds was published in South Africa, well, it wasn't published in South Africa because it was banned. And it was banned on account of the sexy bits, which we were talking about at the beginning, which, I mean, you read them now, and I mean, it's just ridiculous to think that they
Yeah.
would be, because they're not particularly graphic. They're written entirely. I think the first time that Anna and Sean have sex, I think is very well written. I think the interaction between these two teenagers, both of them incredibly curious to find out what it's like. She kind of knowing she shouldn't, but really wanting to. Him just really wanting to.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was banned because of that. Now, today, and I know this having had sensitivity reader problems over writing something that was simply a historically accurate account of something that's really happened in a Wilbur book, and a sensitivity reader saying, you can't say that, and me saying, yes, but that's what actually happened, and them saying, we don't care. I suspect that on the grounds of the fact that there are these Zulus who kind of follow Sean and call him Nkosi, which is, I guess, like Bwana, Massa, whatever, on account of killing huge numbers of elephants, on all sorts of grounds, the book would not be publishable in its present form today. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine if you sent this manuscript in 2023, no publisher, I think, would accept it for those reasons.
I mean, I have to say that I think that is absurd. I mean, now looking back on the South African thing, we say, oh my God, that's just ridiculous. I have a feeling that in 30 years, people will look back and say, well, this is just a new form of Victorianism. It's a new form of prudishness. It's a new form of hypersensitivity and of basically telling other people how they should think and what's not good for them. And we're not allowed to read what's not good for us.
Yeah, and that was very much the mentality of the apartheid regime. Obviously, they banned this book because of the sex. You could not publish crime novels in murder mysteries in South Africa because there was the apartheid regime thought that it's corrupting of the morals to write about people committing crimes. So for decades, crime novels were banned. That's the level of kind of lack of, concern for the public morals, or just crushing lack of imagination on the part of the government, and in terms of trying to control what people think. And you're right, I think it is kind of salutary for us to think, well, there's one of the more odious regimes of the 20th century, and maybe we're falling into some of the same traps.
I agree. Because I think that it's like the whole thing about authors can't write about characters whose lives are different from their own.
Yeah.
The whole point about writing fiction is that you imagine what it's like to be somebody else. I mean, that's what fiction is.
Yeah.
And you imagine what it's like to be in a world that you don't necessarily know, or in a different time period, or in a different place, or a different culture. And that's kind of our job.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean, I suppose the question then comes, okay, are there things that even if you're not woke, are hard to take about this book? And the one thing I did find, I mean, they kill an awful lot of elephants. Now, as it happens, if you read Elephant Song, which Wilbur would have written, I suppose, about 30 years later, which is very much against the wholesale slaughter of elephants and the kind of poaching of elephants. I don't know if that was Wilbur changing his attitudes. He certainly didn't change his attitude about hunting in particular, in general, rather.
Yeah.
Essentially what happens is that Sean goes out and makes a second fortune, killing huge numbers of elephants. And there's something about the relentlessness with which and part of it is he is himself working through some awful compulsive thing in him, even though I understand there were elephant hunters. And of course, in those days, there was no shortage of elephants. But of course, he was creating the shortage of elephants.
Yes, by the time he was finished, there was. Yeah. I mean, there's this passage, because again, drawing the contrast between the characters. So they go on their first elephant hunt, and Sean obviously brings down his target, and he goes back. And Duff's, I think he's not even fired his rifle. And basically, Duff just says, "I don't get it." And there's this great passage where basically, this is Sean, but you sort of feel this is Wilbur talking to the reader a bit as well.
This is the one passage I had marked in the book myself. So we clearly both go to
this one that starts, it was like explaining colour to a blind man, describing the lust of the hunter to someone who was born without it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sean listened. Duff carried on. Duff listened in agonized silence as Sean tried to find the words for the excitement that makes a man's blood sing through his body, that heightens his senses and allows him to lose himself in an emotion as old as the urge to mate. Sean tried to show him how the nobler and more beautiful was the quarry, the stronger was the compulsion to hunt and kill it. It had no conscious cruelty in it, was rather an expression of love, a fierce, possessive love, a devouring love that needed the complete and irrevocable act of death for its consummation. Now there is, in current terms, a deeply, deeply, deeply provocative, problematic paragraph, to which I will only say two things. I'm no hunter. Firstly, I'm no hunter. I have no desire to kill anything. But I think that any of us who eat meat from animals that are killed in slaughterhouses have a nerve to criticize somebody who goes and hunts, because we are benefiting from the industrial slaughter of animals in a way that is at least as cruel as hunting them. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that, particularly in Africa, hunting is the original activity of the human male. I mean, that was what men did in order for the tribe to get their food. I mean, the women gathered the nuts and the berries and what have you. The men went out. And so it is that, I mean, Wilbur's right, that it is a profound human instinct. And he's also right in that, and what's interesting about him as a writer and as a person is that he is at one and the same time a passionate writer about nature, and a passionate believer in conservation, and would and does in On Leopard Rock, which we'll come to. He does argue that there is actually a very clear link between conservation and hunting, and the same thing people say about grouse moors and pheasant shoots and stuff like that, that in order that habitats are preserved if there is an economical benefit to be gained from hunting the animals that live on those habitats.
Yeah, I don't find it so problematic. Now, I also am not a hunter, and I have to say that passage that it doesn't strike a chord within me. I do not feel that urge at all. But I'm also conscious that in the however many tens of thousands of years of human history, I'm the outlier, right? I mean, our sensibilities, even probably in the last 30 or 40 years, we're a blip. For probably our ancestors going back, to Neanderthal times or before, would absolutely probably recognize that. So in a sense, I read it as, again, which I think is one of the joys of fiction, is it's not just being exposed to places that you haven't been to, but actually to ways of thinking that you have never thought. And that's sort of how I take it. So yeah, I agree with you. It's sort of, we as sort of soft, cosseted modern readers read it and think, oh, the poor elephants, which I have that reaction too. But as I say, I read it as of its time and of its place and of something that has been very, very human.
And I don't doubt for a single second that he's writing authentically about the period and about the place and about the attitude. So I certainly wouldn't censor it. I mean, I find kind of writers who wish to censor other writers' work, it's kind of despicable. Really. I completely don't believe in the whole kind of cancelling culture where if you don't like something, you just don't refuse to tolerate anything that you don't like.
I mean, you have to say they've just reissued the Roald Dahl and I think some of the Ian Fleming books with updated language, and you sort of feel that if they tried that with this book, it would go horribly wrong.
The Roald Dahl thing was interesting because the publishers suddenly realised that everybody from Queen Camilla on down was absolutely outraged that the Roald Dahl books, which are the ultimately unwoke books, were suddenly wokeified. And they've been
Yeah.
forced to reissue kind of, I think they call them Roald Dahl Classic. I'd be
Yeah.
very interested to know what the sales figures are.
Yeah.
So I certainly wouldn't think that, oh my God, and I would, if I were Wilbur now, and a publisher told me you've got to take out that elephant killing bit, I'd say, the hell with you.
Yeah.
Again, he's writing about those characters.
Yeah.
But of course, as you say, that bit, and I had exactly the same reaction, that this is Wilbur basically talking to the reader. There's no point in the book at which the characters of Sean and Wilbur Smith are closer together than in that passage.
Yeah.
That's absolutely the point at which they're the same person. Yeah, I just think,
Yeah,
I think,
I agree with that.
I mean, and I
Yeah.
think that it's something which one encounters all the way through. And again, could you have Umbajani written that way in a modern book? I don't know. I just don't know. I have a feeling I doubt it. But anyway, we are coming now to the kind of end of the book, which, boy, is a story with a sting in its tail.
Yeah, or a rabid virus in its bite.
You're right, because there's the rabid virus. In fact, because, gosh, okay, don't be afraid to kill your characters. Is one of those. Anybody seen Game of Thrones and then Lord Stark is killed at the end of series 1?
What? He's killed?
Between then and the end of series 8, so's everybody else.
That's right then.
But I mean, I think there's a very, if readers know that you are prepared to kill any character, because they can't count on, it's all going to be okay. So now here are 2 deaths of people close to Sean. So let's start with the first.
Yeah, so Duff is the first one. So as we said, Duff and Sean are way out beyond the frontier in the wilderness hunting. And Duff gets bitten by a rabid jackal. And this is, you have to say, this is a very Wilburish way to go. And it's just horrific. I mean, this was the bit where I could kind of deal with the elephant killing, but the way that Duff dies, the virus gradually takes hold of him, and eventually Sean has to chain him up like a wild animal, and Duff kind of becomes this sort of crazed animal leaping about on the end of his chain.
But what's really clever about it is that at first, so 2 creatures get bitten by this rabid jackal. One is a dog and one is Duff. And the dog dies, but Duff seems to be okay. But then he isn't.
Yes, but this description of Duff in his sort of later stages, the madness was a fire in his eyes and his cheeks twitched, a yellowish froth coated his teeth and formed a thin line of scum along his lips. I mean, he's just become this absolute monster.
Scum and pus and bodily fluids are things which will recur again and again in the world of Earth.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Duff dies. Sean is.
Yes, I think the thing we should just flag about that as well is that, of course, Sean has this dilemma, and again, this is really unflinching, because Duff says, "Promise me you won't shoot me like you shot the dog," and Sean promises, and then has to watch Duff just go downhill and downhill, and it gets grimmer and grimmer and grimmer. And Sean has this agonizing dilemma of, do I break my oath and shoot him to put him out of his misery, because there's only one way this is going to end, or do I keep my oath but watch him die this absolutely horrible death? And again, Wilbur kind of splits the dilemma, but then in an even worse way, because he waits until the very end and then he shoots him. So he's managed to both give him the horrible death and break his oath.
That's the point. But Umbajani also, basically, because he discusses, because Umbajani is still saying you should do it.
Yeah.
And it's him, I think, who kind of, in a sense, gives Sean the permission, if you know what I mean, the justification for doing it. So there's another case where, as it were, the person who's apparently in the servile position is in fact kind of the moral leader.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think it's we're talking about a sort of a coming of age story, and I think there's something a bit like, almost sort of like Pilgrim's Progress or something like this book, where it's a series of episodic events, each of which Sean learns something about life and about himself, and becomes more of the man he is destined to be. And this is a brutal lesson.
Luckily, however, for Sean, he's about to have a good fight.
Yes, yes. I'm sure that there's a PhD to be written on the significance of symbolic fights in this book.
I think you're right about the Pilgrim's Progress thing. He does. He has these episodes and learns from them, and he comes across a family of Boer trekkers because he essentially camps in land, which they think of as it. And that the young man of the family is called Jan Paulus.
Yeah.
And he and Sean, being two alpha males, kind of like dogs, rub each other up the wrong way. And naturally, they have to have a thumping good fight.
Yeah.
Which is approved of by the young boy's mother and his sisters and his father. They think this is just the sort of way two young chaps should make their introductions.
Yeah.
And on the wagon is this beautiful girl, Katrina.
Yeah.
Young girl. She's only 16.
16 going on 17, as they say. Yeah.
And they fall in love. Sean now, for the first time, falls in love.
Yeah.
And after swimming across a raging torrent, the Limpopo River, I think is one.
Yeah.
He swims across the river, which is in spate, to get to her.
Yeah.
And emerges bedraggled the far side, and this act of daring do naturally wins over the fair maiden. And you think, oh, good, this is all going to end very happily. And they marry, and she has a child, and then she gets malaria. And you think, oh my God, she's not going to die of malaria. No, please don't die of malaria. You're the heroine. And she survived.
Yeah.
You think, oh, great.
Yeah.
Phew, happy ending, ahoy. No. And this, spoiler alert, for those of us who have been 59 years, you've had to read this, but just in case you haven't, stop listening now. Well, you don't. Come back next week. But be careful. Anyway, over to you to spoil the ending of this podcast.
So I think the first thing to say is that it sort of speaks to the unconventional structure of this book, that the great love of his life doesn't rock up until page 420 of about page of 530. So she comes in very late. They have this sort of whirlwind romance. As you say, she gets pregnant and has the son. And then they go back to Johannesburg, which is, I think, the first time he's been back since he was run out of town. And he sees Candy, who had been, listeners will remember, the barkeeper of the saloon when they first rocked up there to seek their fortunes in gold. We skipped over the bit where Duff is engaged to her. They plan this incredibly elaborate wedding, and on her wedding morning, Duff jilts her and runs away because and this is his kind of character flaw. He basically has this phobia of family, based on his own kind of past relationships with his father and his first wife, who we should add is still alive, and so technically it would have been bigamy, but that's a lesser issue. So Duff's jilted her. After the failed wedding, Candy does take solace in Sean's arms. And they sleep together, and I think it's only the once, and it's kind of sympathy sex, I guess.
Plunges into the candy deep.
Are we allowed to have that in this podcast? I'm not sure. Yes. So they have had this one moment of kind of shared passion in what's otherwise, as you say, a very platonic and kind of business-like relationship.
I think it's also fun. I mean, I think she's kind of. I think all the characters in the book, in some respects, she's shown in almost the most sympathetic. Kind of, she's always well-meaning. She always just wants good things to happen. She livens up both their lives.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's been a sort of ray of sunshine, isn't she?
Yeah. So Sean reconnects with her in Johannesburg, and Katrina sees this. And in fact, while Katrina is sort of passed out, Candy comes to their hotel and spends some time with Sean, and it's all completely innocent. She wants to know what's happened to Duff. They're catching up with her old friend. But Katrina has this, her kind of fatal flaw is this tremendous insecurity. And she concludes from this that Sean has been unfaithful with Candy.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me, I read it also, I'm not sure Sean, Wilbur, it now reads as kind of partly postnatal depression. She's lost their second child.
Yeah.
And she's had malaria. So I think we are sort of told that, that she's going to be very psychologically frail and what have you. So she's in a very delicate state psychologically at this point, a very vulnerable state, which of course a man like Sean is
not well equipped to notice.
Yeah, he said, "Well, I'll take you shopping and I'll buy you new dresses." Da, 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 da. Actually, she's in no mood. She's not well enough for it, and she doesn't. It's sort of more for his pleasure than for hers. If you know what I mean. But it's not meant badly by him. He just doesn't quite know what to do in this circumstance.
Yeah. So she goes up to the Candy Deep and hurls herself into it.
Yes, she does.
And that is that. So
there's a rather powerful detail actually, which is that she has the family Bible, and in the family Bible they write the names of the family members when they're born and when they die. And Sean realized, and at first when she goes missing, everybody says, "Don't worry, she's just gone off. She'll come back. She's just in a bad mood. She's punishing you," or something. And then he opens up the Bible, and she's written the date of death.
Yeah.
Next to her name. And actually you don't see her do it. All you see is he goes up to the Candy Deep and he just sees like a strand of her dress or whatever it is fluttering from the wire.
Yeah, it's a green shawl caught on the barbed wire fence, flapping its wings like a big green bird of prey.
Yeah. And so as a but here's the thing. And although Garrick has been mentioned because Sean meets in the bar when he gets back to Johannesburg, he meets kind of an old school friend who's become this very pompous, successful cattle person, and sort of hears about Garrick and Ada and gets a bit of a lecture about, you've not, Garrick's now drunk, but you've not written to your mother, she's desperate, da 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 da. So there's a kind of a sense that he's not there's a sort of moral debt that has to be paid. But when the book kind of ends with him looking down into the mine, and all you want to do is to find out what happens next.
Yeah.
And what's kind of fascinating is that in real life, Wilbur then wrote a ton of other books that had nothing to do with this, and yet didn't come back to this story for several years.
Yes.
But as a reader now, I ended the book kind of shocked, but precisely because I was shocked, I was like, okay, so how is this going to resolve? The story has in no way, it's sort of been resolved, but it's not been resolved. You just want to know how is Sean going to redeem himself because he's been punished. He's lost everything that he's cared about, his best friend, the only woman he's really loved. The money he's made from killing all those elephants kind of doesn't mean anything to him anymore. Golly, I want to know what happens next.
Yeah. So the ending is extraordinary. So the fact that it's page 533 where he sees the shawl at the top of the mine shaft and realizes what happened. And before you get to the end of page 534, the book is over. So there is no time at all. It's astonishingly, shockingly abrupt ending.
This is one of those naive kind of, the whole technique of the book is it has no technique.
Yeah.
Because these things just happen one after another. And it's not kind of neat. It's not all wrapped up in a bow, which he'll learn to do later. It's quite Victorian in that respect, kind of the frankness of the loss. But it's incredibly powerful. And you can see why publishers reading it, because out of nowhere, here's this South African guy just appears with this book, or South African, really, they would have thought South African. And it's just extraordinarily powerful. And just, it reminded me of this. I used to know a guy called Ian Truan, who was a great publishing editor. And he worked with another very, 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 very famous best-selling, mega-selling author of some controversy and renown. And he said that this guy, when they got the manuscripts in, the scripts were kind of gibberish. The facts were just ludicrously wrong.
Hmm.
Nothing kind of made sense. And yet you were completely gripped. And he said, if we were all Stone Age people sitting around a fire, X, the mystery author, would be the one telling us the stories.
Yeah.
And Wilbur, although his book is not at all gibberish because it's incredibly well, as I said, it's incredibly well informed. He knows exactly what he's writing about. Nevertheless, what you come away with is here is somebody who's just the storyteller of the tribe. He just knows how to tell a story. And even that for all the things that you and I might professionally look, I can go, and I dare say he would have done in later years. Golly, it's a good book.
I mean, my understanding of the ending it's the first time I read it, I was just like, what? How can you do that to me? And of course, as you said, he didn't go back to it to continue the Sean story for years, and he never intended to. I mean, I think he's on record saying that, as far as he was concerned, that was the end of the story. And the Courtneys is now the longest running series in literary history. And just want to read the last two lines of the book because they're, in a sense, they're very unrevealing. So Sean's standing there, having just seen what's happened to Katrina. He's there with his son, Dirk. And Dirk says, "You're going to cry, Daddy." And the lines are, "No, Dirk," Sean answered, "I'm not going to cry. Crying never helps very much." And Umbajani took them to where the wagons waited at Pretoria. You're looking at that thinking, what am I supposed to make of that? But as I've thought about this book and tried to understand it, my theory of this book is that this is basically Wilbur in dialogue with Kipling's poem, if you can meet with triumph and disaster just the same, etc., then you'll be a man, my son. And in fact, in his autobiography, and this is something we'll come on to, he talks about how that poem has been a touchstone of his life and his writing. And in a sense, the triumph and disaster just the same is the point. So it ends on a disaster because it is the same as a triumph. The point is not that it's great and we're all happy for him. The point is that Sean is now enough of a man that he can deal with both these incredible highs that he's had and these incredible lows. And I think that's how the ending makes sense to me.
So that is When the Lion Feeds, which we have discussed in almost as long as it would take you to read it. And I think it says on the front of the paperback edition, "A master storyteller, Sunday Times." And it is. It's the work of a master storyteller. It is the first flowering of someone who was just put on this earth to tell stories.
Yes, and it's interesting when Wilbur talked about the way he wrote, it was very much, I just write the story as it comes to me. It wasn't planned, it wasn't kind of carefully crafted in advance. It was just him reacting to his characters and whatever was feeling right to him as a storyteller. And I think you do get that in the sort of the very loose structure of this book.
He said to me once in one of our interviews that he ended every day's work halfway through a sentence, and all he knew was how he was going to end the sentence. And after that, it was just going to take care of itself. And that's what he did. And yes, he learned over the years the technique of how you structure these things, which this book does not have, but it has something which you can't be taught, which is the gift of narrative.
Yeah. I think it's far more interesting, actually, for the lack of technique. I love this book. And one of the reasons I love it for many reasons. One of the reasons is that it is not, if he had set it up so that, Hradsky is his enemy from childhood and they have a kind of climactic showdown.
Yes.
And it's clear, everything's tied up, and then he gets the girl, and it ends with a slightly more satisfying, rounded out conclusion. It wouldn't be the book it is. It's so different, and it subverts your expectations at every turn, and that's really our storytelling, isn't it? That you're constantly surprising the reader and kind of delighting them with the surprises, even if the surprises actually are horrible things.
I agree. You don't. Yeah, it's completely unpredictable because he hasn't predicted it. He's just written it.
Yes.
So the reason is, whereas I mean, so many books. Okay, there's a pleasure you get in a romantic novel, or indeed a thriller. You know that James Bond is going to survive. You know that the heroine is going to get her man, but you just want to know how.
Yeah.
And the pleasure comes from this, and there's the kind of jeopardy where it looks like it's not going to happen, but then it does. Yeah. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl.
Yeah.
And so the pleasure comes in how is the formula going to be played out. In this, no formula at all.
Yeah.
You just want to turn the page.
I mean, if there was one tribute to a book you can give, and I think that Wilbur would have wanted, it's that, isn't it? You just want to turn the page.
Absolutely. So that wraps up our deep, deep dive into When the Lion Feeds, Wilbur Smith's first novel. So next time, we will be talking about the man who wrote that book. We'll be looking at On Leopard Rock, which is Wilbur Smith's kind of autobiography, kind of memoir, kind of also a book in which stories sort of happen one after another without any great sense of structure. And look forward to seeing you then.
Yes, thanks very much.
That Wilbur Smith Show is produced by Christopher Wynne.
Music by Dewey DeLay.